Hello Aqua friends, my name is Nicole and today we're going to do a still life of these wonderful oranges. Here's the reference photo that inspired me to make these oranges. I changed the value study of this and kind of made it my own because I didn't want a really dark background. I wanted it bright and cheery and having some sky peek out here and there. But the first thing I'm going to do is paint the oranges. So some of this is going to be in focus and some of it's going to be out of focus. My main subject, which is these three oranges, and some of those main leaves will be in focus. And so I'm starting off doing wet on wet, and I am taking my time wetting the orange really, really well. I'm working on an 11 by 17 piece of paper, so this did take me a couple hours, 2.5 to 3 hours to create. Therefore, I have sped up the video double time. So the first color I'm putting down is my phthalo blue. This orange is not ripe. This one is on the green side, and so the yellow and the blue are going to make green. And I'm keeping the area where the highlight is pretty light. The yellow that I'm using is cadmium yellow, and that is going to be the first layer of color I'm putting down. Now I'm also adding this beautiful rich green gold by Daniel Smith. This is one of my favorite colors. It's so brilliant, and it is a beautiful yellow-green color. Fantastic springtime color. Now I'm switching to my sap green. I'm using a mop brush for this, or quill brush. It's a medium size. Has a really nice tip and it holds a lot of water. But notice that the paints that I'm using in my palette are pretty dry. Since I have so much moisture on my paper, in order to spread it out and get the brilliant colors that you want, you don't need a lot of moisture in your brush. I have a piece of cloth that I'm also wiping my brush on, or paper towel. I always have something like that handy so that I'm constantly adjusting the moisture level in my brush. The bottom of this orange has that dark spot that I'm putting in right now, and building up those green colors. So once I'm happy with the amount of pigment I have on there, while it's still damp, I'm taking a dry, fluffy brush and I am just kind of blending the areas together so that it's nice and soft. Now with a round brush, I'm using a thick mixture of that same sap green, and I'm just stippling. The orange is still damp, and so these tiny little dots that I'm making will soften. And that is about it for that first orange. Moving on to the second orange, this one is not touching the first one, so I don't have to let the first one dry completely. I can just go about painting this second one. So taking my time, making sure that I have the edges nice and wet. I'm going to go over and moisten that and re-moisten it quite a few times before I start with the actual colors. There I go again, re-wetting it. I kind of like to let it dry a little bit, like really get soaked into the fibers, and then add more on top so that it's nice and shiny. And I just keep moving the water around. I don't want puddles, but I want it to be nice and shiny. So starting off, there is a little bit of a shadow underneath the leaf that's above this orange. So I am pulling in some of that blue along with my favorite rich green gold. Putting a layer of the cadmium yellow onto my orange. Now from there, I am going to switch to using my orange that I have in my palette and adding that. Now this color is called Aussie Red Gold, and it's another Daniel Smith, one of my favorite colors. Along with adding in that Aussie Gold, I'm just putting quinacridone red. So it's going to mix together on my paper instead of me mixing the colors on my palette. So building up my values, going from my lightest to my darkests, and really shaping the orange so that it has a more three-dimensional look. I'm using red and green to make a darker version for the shadow underneath the leaf, and I'm just adding that at the very top of the orange. My paper is still really wet, and so I can continue to add these colors, increasing the saturation of this orange. And remember, your paper, when it dries, the colors will fade. It will fade about 25%. Now that I'm done with that, I'm using my fluffy brush just to blend things out a little bit more. And with the same small round brush, I am using the same colors to stipple some of the texture of the orange on there. Now I did have to let my whole paper dry before I start my third orange because they are touching one another. So you're going to let your whole paper dry before you do that last orange. And we're going to use the exact same colors. Go about it the exact same way by wetting your area really well. You can see how wet my paper is because it's actually buckling. I'll be using a more quinacridone red in this one because it is in the shadows and it is darker. Now again, go in for some green in order to get a shadow color. Adding some blue in the mix. Blue and orange are contrasting on the color wheel so that I can get a shadowy sort of color here. So notice how much that pushes it back and pops the main orange into the foreground. Fluffy brush trick. and then a teeny bit of stippling. So while that orange dries, I can go ahead and start on some leaves. Working the leaves in the same way, wetting the leaves first. Now, some of these leaves we're seeing the backside and they're a lot lighter in value. And that is the leaf I'm working on right now. It does have some reddish tinges, and so I'm using my reds as well as my yellows and greens. Now, switching to my script liner brush, I do have some shadow green that I'm mixing with my sap green to get some of the veins in. And some of the details that I'm seeing in the reference photo. Now, all the leaves that I want to do in focus are going to be done the exact same way we did the oranges. Wetting it, putting in your base color, building up your colors, building up your values. You just have to make certain that when you move on to a new area, the area that's touching the part that you're working on has to be completely dry. Otherwise, you could risk making a bloom and wrecking all your hard work. Now I'm touching that other leaf to see if it's dry enough for me to add a little bit of details here. There's a pretty dark shadow on the underside of the leaf that I am adding in. Just lifting a little extra paint there. Some of the leaves are warmer in color, and so I'm putting an underpainting of the yellowy orange color. Kind of like to paint in the direction that the veins go as well. Moving on to the next one. Now these leaves have a lot more vibrancy, and so I'm really adding a lot of the green gold. I don't rinse out my brush, I'm just going into the sap green now. So you can continue making your leaves, looking at the reference photo, deciding which ones are going to be more vibrant, changing the values so that it adds interest to your composition. Now that I'm done all my leaves, there is a faint orange in the back of the three main ones here. So I'm going to wet that area and put it in, but I'm going to put it in very faintly. I don't want that to distract from the main three here. So I'm adding some of that mixture, the shadowy mixture, and just putting a glaze over it so it does push it back in the background. So this is what I have so far. This is the main composition. Everything else is going to be out of focus and in the background. So far, this is a one-layer painting, including the background that I'm going to be putting is just going to be one layer. And when you go through this process, I have to kind of see what the background is going to do to my main oranges. If it's going to blend in too much, I might have to opt for a second layer on my oranges to up the saturation and vibrancy, but I don't know that yet. I do plan on using the same colors. I don't want that darkness that is in the reference photo. I want it like you're looking up into the sky kind of idea where you have some leaves, but you have some blue sky. I just thought it would be more interesting if the background was lighter so that the cluster that I have kind of is the main attraction. So it is a little tedious. Notice that I have to get in all those nooks and crannies in order to wet the paper. I am working on a block, which means that this watercolor paper is glued down on all four sides with a tiny little opening in order to slide a palette knife to lift off your painting once it's dry. So they're quite nice to work with. If you've never tried a watercolor block, I highly recommend it. So this whole process of wetting the background will take a good 5 minutes probably because of all those little areas that you have to get in between. And once I'm getting all those little areas and the tight corners, then I'm going to have to re-wet the part that I already wet because that part will be starting to dry. So I'll fast forward through this boring part. Nobody wants to watch me wet paper. All right. Now that I'm happy with that, I have to work quickly. And I absolutely love like a Windsor blue or a peacock blue for sky blue. I tend to like the warmer blues. So I am using a warm blue, and I'm not going to put the blue everywhere. I'm going to have it kind of blending out into the white of the paper as well. But I have to start somewhere, and I'm going to start in all these nooks and crannies because it takes a while to paint around my leaves. Okay, so switching between my mop brush and a flat brush and varying my blues too. I don't want a really dark blue everywhere, so I'm softening out those edges into the background paper. So in my mind, I'm kind of trying to decide, okay, where am I going to put the blue of the sky? Where am I going to put some more leaves that are out of focus in the background? Maybe a couple more oranges out of focus. And so I'm leaving some white spaces. So I also kind of wanted to make a branch because I felt like it needed to be stationed somewhere and it's just like not floating on its own. So I thought a couple of branches might be a good idea. I felt like I needed some more blue in the bottom corner since I didn't have much happening there. I'm just adding some blue. And now my paper is really starting to dry, and that's pretty much all I want to do for this out of focus background. For the veins of the leaves, I did decide to put a little bit of detail in there, but instead of going darker like I did with my main leaves using the shadow green, I'm using a script liner brush, and it's going to basically make lighter lines down the middle of these leaves. And I'm not going for a ton of detail, just a little bit. Always make sure you wipe off the extra moisture or else you'll make too much of a bloom. I like to call this a controlled bloom. So after I added the background, I did think that my main clump of oranges and leaves needed another layer. So I'm not going to explain that. I'm just going to let you watch and see how I go about increasing the saturation and basically working with the same colors. Some of the leaves that were too dull, I'll add more of those really, really pretty, highly pigmented colors like that green gold, and then for the oranges, the Aussie red gold is really going to be perfect choices to make those pop. So notice how much those three main oranges really, really make the painting. They pop in the foreground so well, and they're so pretty and brilliant. Final touches are just making sure I have my shadows in there for my leaves. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll see you next time.